In episode 6, the Mandalorian and the child head to that planet that was told to them by Ahsoka Tano. And the Mandalorian parks his ship, he heads up to the rock, and he places the child on it, but nothing happens. And as the Mandalorian is trying to get something to happen, he notices that his ship has arrived. So at that point, he needs to get the hell out of there. He doesn't know who these people are, but when he turns around, that is suddenly when the child has decided to harness the power of the Jedi. And when the Mandalorian tries to get to the child, the force field that the child has created actually pushes the Mandalorian back. He can't penetrate this thing. So the Mandalorian decides to investigate who is actually in this ship, and it turns out to be Boba Fett. He's been tracking the Mandalorian, and he wants his armor back, but the Mandalorian is hesitant to give it up, and Boba Fett isn't telling him that he's a Mandalorian. Boba Fett tells him that the armor is his and it was given to him by his father. And then he reveals that he has a sharpshooter on a ridge ready to fire. But not at the Mandalorian, the sharpshooter is ready to fire on the child. And when he looks up on the ridge, to his surprise, the sharpshooter is Fennec, who he thought was dead. I mean, he left her for dead, but it turns out that Boba Fett actually saved her, and because of that, she is forever in his debt. Now, Boba Fett isn't trying to muscle the Mandalorian into giving him his armor. He's willing to make a negotiation saying, if you give me the armor, I guarantee the safety of both you and the child. And that's a pretty good offer because there's a massive bounty on the child's head. A bounty that's worth way more than the armor. But that conversation is interrupted when yet another ship shows up. So the Mandalorian heads up to check on the child while Boba Fett and Fennec go to investigate who these people are, and it turns out that the ship is full of stormtroopers. And while the Mandalorian is unsuccessfully trying to get to the child because he still can't penetrate the force field, Boba Fett and Fennec piece up this ship of stormtroopers, just demolishing them. But as soon as they finish up, yet another ship of stormtroopers arrives, coming at them in waves. But it's becoming more and more difficult to fight them off. Fennec and Boba Fett actually get broken up, and Fennec is kind of surrounded by stormtroopers. But luckily for her, the Mandalorian, realizing that there was nothing he could really do with the child, goes down to help them fight. Of course, as soon as he leaves, the child ends up dropping the force field, so he's just sitting there like a lame duck. But the Mandalorian ends up saving Fennec, helping her fight off the stormtroopers, as does Boba Fett, who is now wearing his armor, because he ended up coming across the Mandalorian ship that was open, and he decided to go in and grab his armor. So the Mandalorian, Boba Fett, Fennec, they end up killing a lot of the stormtroopers, and the ones that survived end up getting in the ship to flee. But the ship doesn't get too far because Boba Fett fires a rocket from his jetpack and destroys the ship. Although that's not the only ship that's destroyed, because shortly after that happens, something shoots out of the sky and absolutely destroys the Mandalorian ship, blowing it to bits. And at this point, they know that they're not alone. So Boba Fett makes his way to his ship, while the Mandalorian and Fennec try to make their way up the mountain to grab the child and make sure he's okay. But the child is in danger, because Moff Gideon is hovering in the sky in his own ship, and having just destroyed the Mandalorian ship, he ends up sending a bunch of dark troopers down to pick up the child. And unfortunately for the Mandalorian and Fennec, they arrive just a few seconds too late, but in enough time to see that the child has been taken by the dark troopers as the dark troopers head back up to Moff Gideon. At this point, though, Boba Fett has arrived at his ship, and he's following these dark troopers to see where they're going. But when the clouds clear, to his shock, he radios to Fennec saying, "Oh my god, the Empire's back." Now, Boba Fett's ship is pretty small. He can't fight off this Imperial cruiser, and it doesn't even matter because the Imperial cruiser floors it and gets out of there. And when Boba Fett gets back down to the ground, he sees that the Mandalorian is investigating the destruction of his own ship. And the only things that survived are the Beskar spear that he got and this little knob that the child used to play with. The Mandalorian, realizing there's nothing left, slowly makes his way over to Fennec and Boba Fett. And Boba Fett, who is still wearing his armor, is able to prove to the Mandalorian that it is indeed his armor. And when he does that, the Mandalorian tells him, "Okay, well then our deal's complete." But Boba Fett says, "No, it isn't. I told you that if you give me this armor, you'll be safe and the child is safe. And the child isn't safe right now. Until we return the child back to you, our deal is not complete. So me and Fennec are in your service." So Fennec, Boba Fett, and the Mandalorian head to Navarro, where there's a new sheriff in town, and her name is Cara Dune. I should say Marshal, but, you know, there's a new Marshal in town isn't really a saying. The Mandalorian has shown up, though, looking for a favor. He needs to know where Mayfield is, because he's looking to break him out. He figures Mayfield can help him locate Moff Gideon's cruiser. Cara Dune is very reluctant to do this, because she has respect for the badge. But her attitude changes when the Mandalorian reveals that it's only because Moff Gideon now has the child. And while this is going down, the child is in custody of Moff Gideon, completely zapped of his powers. He's just exhausted. But the reason he's exhausted is because he just took out 2 stormtroopers. And Moff gets down next to him and says, "You've gotten really good at that, but it makes you oh so sleepy." He then shows him his dark saber, and the child does reach for it, but he says, No, you're not ready to play with that." Moff then turns to one of the stormtroopers and instructs him to put the kid to sleep. And he does that, and he puts the child in shackles. He then instructs what appears like his second in command that once they get out of hyperspace, alert Dr. Pershing through an encrypted message that they have the donor. Thank you so much for watching this recap. Please consider subscribing to the channel. If you don't see the next video up in the corner, don't worry, I'll get it up in a couple days. Hit thumbs up if you liked the video, hit thumbs down if you didn't, and be nice in the comments section.